When I first made this jigsaw puzzle, I made it using sprites. There are 8 pieces, so I had 8 separate sprites. That meant that each sprite had to have the code on it. And of course, if I made any alterations, I'd have to alter it in 8 different places. What would it be like if I had a jigsaw with 30 pieces or 100 pieces? So it occurred to me that using clones would be a much better way of approaching this particular game. And I think this is a good way to show you just how useful clones can be. So here we go. We're going to make the jigsaw puzzle using just clones. First up, I need an SVG map of Australia. Luckily enough, I was able to find one on the internet. There it is. Load it in. Let's put it in the center to start with. And also let's make it a little bit larger. Looks about right. Now a duplicate, and the duplicate will be for the pieces. And what we do is get the paint can and have a bit of fun colouring in the pieces. Make a duplicate of the coloured in map for the end result. Being the end result, we don't want it showing right away, so we need to go into the script and put a hide in there. It doesn't hide straight away, or it does actually, but it's this one here that we can see behind it. Now this is going to be the pieces, so we go into the costumes. When we click on it, you can see that the pieces are joined together. Over here there's an ungroup, and when we click on that, the pieces are separated, and we'll be able to pick them out one at a time. So make 7 copies of this. Go back to the first one and select each piece and press the delete key. And we're left with just the one piece. Just going to enlarge this a bit for you. Now a bit of a catch here, because the center of this piece is there and it's meant to be there. There is this tool up here for going over and clicking on the center and fixing that up, but unfortunately when you do that, this little circle disappears. So this is the way I get around that. I select the item and then I move it to the top left hand corner. So the little circle is in the top left hand corner, which means I know where it is. So when I click the crosshairs tool, I can click in the top left hand corner, and now that will be properly centered. So we go and repeat that process for the other 6 pieces. And what I like to do is, for that extra piece that I put in, I delete everything, so it's actually empty. Okay, so what have we got now? We've got the 7 pieces. So, but that's just one sprite. So if I just click on one piece, we've got the red piece, click on another, we've got the orange piece, and so on. So we've obviously got to make clones, and each clone will have a different costume. So back to our scripts, and we'll get a loop of 7 to make our 7 costumes. Make sure the costume starts off at the first one, which is just called Australia. And then clearly after we make each clone, we simply do next costume. Click on the green flag, and there you've got it. You've already got the pieces for a jigsaw. In fact, we can almost start doing the jigsaw already. Let's pick up Tasmania and move it down. Oh, but we can't move Tasmania. This is because the properties are set up by default to say can drag in player is unticked. If we tick it, go back out again and restart, we'll find now that we can move the pieces. So basically we've got a jigsaw that works already. Look at that. With very few instructions. Of course the catch is the game doesn't know when the player's finished, neither does the player for that matter, and the player can still move pieces around even after they're put in the right place. So clearly we've got to do something about that. Also, when the game starts at the moment, it'd be nice if the pieces were all spread out all over the place. And that's very, very easy to do. All we do is go to the pieces and the scripts. And here, before we make each piece, we should move to a random place. There it is, there's random position. Now have a look at what happens. Every time I click the green flag, the pieces will go to a different place, which is a bit more fun. Now what we need to do is work out where each piece should go, where it belongs, and this is the way I do that. I go out, I grab a piece, and I put it as close as I can to where it should go. Then I go back behind the scenes and I see where it's ended up. I need to be on scripts, see over here, and I write those numbers down. Then I do the same for the next piece. The only catch is you need to do them in the same order as you did here. So the next one will be the orange. So go out and do the orange. Go behind the scenes, see where it's ended up. Remember, you've got to be in scripts to see these numbers. 379, and so on until you've done all the numbers for all pieces. Now the question is, what do we do with those numbers? Well, we store them in our program in a list. Why you do that? Simply go to Data, make a list. It's going to be for all sprites so everybody can see them. So we'll make up one for the X numbers, and a moment later we'll make one for the Y numbers. To put your numbers in, go over to the list and press the plus sign. Put the first number in, press enter or return, and then put the next number in. And just keep going until you have them all in, and after the last one you don't need to press return. So when you've finished you should have 7 numbers in, and that corresponds to the 7 pieces. And then you do exactly the same thing for Y. And again you should end up with 7 numbers. Now it's very important these numbers are correct, because if they're not correct then the program will make a mistake when it decides whether a piece is in the right place or not. So what I like to do now is to test whether we got the numbers right. So first of all I'll just take them off the screen and we'll start the game up. And what I do is I set up an event. I broadcast a test message. And remember we're in the pieces at the moment, when I receive test, and remember that every clone will receive this broadcast message, when it receives that message we want it to move to its correct position. So this means that we set X to the number in the list. But the piece doesn't know what number it is. So before we can go any further, we have to make sure each piece gets a number. We do that by setting up a new variable called n, but it must be for just this sprite, so each one gets a separate number. Set n to 0 before we start the loop, and then just before we make each clone change n by 1. So the first clone will get number 1, and then the next one will get 2, and so on and so on and so on. So over here we set x to item number n of the x list, and similarly we set y to item number n of the y list. So when we broadcast test, the pieces should go to their correct positions. And if we go out to full screen, you can see it's pretty close. I must admit I wasn't all that careful, seeing this is just a tutorial. I'm sure you can get them a bit more accurate than that, but they're certainly close enough for the sake of this demonstration. And you notice how n has got up to 7, as you would expect. So we can hide n now. Alright, so the next question is, when the player puts a piece in the right place, the program will have to check whether or not that piece is in the right place. So we need another broadcast. This broadcast will be called check, for want of a better name. And I repeat that every clone will receive this broadcast, so we can say when I receive check, just make sure we're talking to Australia too, there we go. When I receive check, what do I have to do? Well, I have to look at my X position, and I have to look at where I'm supposed to be, and I have to compare them. And if they're equal, then at least the X position is right. But for them to be equal, you've got to be incredibly accurate. And of course, we're probably not even accurate with the numbers we've got. So what I prefer to do is just find the difference between them, and say if the difference is less than 10, say, then that's close enough. The catch is, if this number is bigger than this one, then that'll turn out to be a negative number, and that negative number will always be less than 10. So what we have to do is to put in a little function here called the abs function. Abs stands for absolute, and what absolute does is just takes the size of the number, ignoring whether it's positive or negative. So if we pop that in there, we are now in business. We can get it in. There it goes. Let's bring it over so I can see what's going on. Okay, so if all of that is true, then the X value is close enough. So we have to do exactly the same thing for the Y value. So I'll need an abs. So you should end up with what I've got here. So what this means is, if this is true and this is true, then it's in position, or near enough to position. So what I do is grab two if conditionals, and I put this one in the first one, and this one in the second one, and I say if this is true, well then it's worth having a look at the second one. I do it like that. Now what this means is, if both of those conditions are true and we get into this empty space here, that means it's in close enough and near enough position. I had a bit of a problem then deciding how could I tell the player that it's actually in the right position. So I had this great idea of just simply hiding it. And I thought it'd be rather fun to make a sound. So I'm going to play the pop sound. So that's when I receive check. Alrighty, so let's put a piece close to position, or we better restart it first. Put that piece close and broadcast check. The problem is that this is going over and over and over again because it's always in the right position, even though we've hidden it. So what we need to do is we need to have a way of a piece knowing when it has been dealt with. So what I do is I set up another variable and I call this variable done. Once again, it's just for this sprite only, so each clone gets its own copy. And what I do is I set done to 0 before I go into the loop so that every clone ends up getting done as 0. And as you can probably guess, what I do then is down here, as soon as I know it's correct, I set done to 1. And now I have to put in another control loop that checks whether or not done is equal to 0. Because only if it's equal to 0 should we bother checking. Because if it's equal to 1, that means it's already been put in right position. So let's see how we go now. There it is, almost in the right position. Broadcast check. And you see it's disappeared. So we don't need to show done anymore. Try another piece. Broadcast check. The catch is, of course, we can't be sitting behind the scenes clicking on broadcast check every time the player puts the piece down. And sadly there's no way for our program to know when the player puts the piece down. So one way around this is to go behind the scenes. Here's the stage, behind the scenes, and set up a loop that goes forever. And what this loop does is does that broadcast for us over and over again. So we must start this the moment the game starts. And this means that all the time this will be checking or sending out the broadcast check message, and these pieces will be checking, and sooner or later we're going to end up with the piece in the right position. So let's see how it works. Start it up. Pretty amazing, huh? And the player is finished because all the pieces are gone. But we were going to show the whole coloured map when it's finished, so we need to have some way of knowing in our program when the player is finished. Well, there's a very simple way to do that. We just count the pieces, because when 7 pieces are in place, we must have finished. To do that, we'll need another variable. This variable I call count, and it's for all sprites this time. And initially, behind the scenes, we need to set count to 0. I'll just stop that because it's still going. And then over here where the pieces are, each time we put a piece in the right place, we'll need to increase count by 1. Just move this up a little bit so there's room. Okay. So each time a piece is put in the right position, count will go up by 1. So when it gets up to 7, that means we're finished. So we can go back here, and instead of using a forever loop, which incidentally is a very bad thing to do in a computer program, we can instead use a repeat until, and we basically want to repeat until count is equal to 7. And then when that happens, then what we want to do is tell this guy here to show himself. So we can do that by sending out another broadcast message. I'm going to just call it N because it's the end of the game. But you might want to do other things, might want to play some fancy music. So this guy over here, when I receive end, I want to show myself. Woo, let's see how we're going. We're away. Done this so many times, they're getting pretty good at it. There you go. See the counters up to 7, and you can see the coloured map has come in. You could add text to this if you wanted, something saying awesome or well done or something like that. The final thing I want to show you is to make it more interesting, I like the pieces to be rotated, and the player has to rotate them back again to get it right. To do that is very, very straightforward. We simply go to the pieces, just get myself a little bit more space here, and make sure the pieces are pointed in the right direction to start with, which is in direction 90, and then turn the piece by either 90, 180 or 270, and I do that simply by getting a multiplication, multiplied by 90, and getting a random number between 1 and 3, and you see, just to demonstrate, when I click on that, I get random values. Should get a 180 somewhere along the line, and that's what we want to turn by. And we put that in just before we make each piece. Don't need that anymore. Don't need that anymore. Just get that out of the road. There we go. Alright, let's see how it looks. The pieces have all twisted. Every time we do another one, they'll be different. Makes for a better jigsaw. But of course the player now has to have some way of turning them. And the obvious thing is if they click on them, they will turn. That's very easy to do. All we need to do is say, when this sprite is clicked, turn 90 degrees. This sprite, of course, will refer to the particular clone. So when I click on the green one, it will turn 90 degrees. But of course there's one other catch here. Now until the piece has been turned to be in the original direction, which is 90, it can't be correct. So our check has to have yet another if statement here. And this one will be if direction is equal to 90, then it's worth checking. So that will have to go around there. I think that's got it? Yes. Just move it up a bit. We're running out of space, aren't we? It's because I've got it very big, so it's easy for you to read. Alrighty, time for the big test. Green flag to start. Click to turn. And it's turned. And it's now in the right whatever. Try putting a piece in the right place. Without turning it, nothing happens. Get it in the right place, turned, and it's all okay. I could almost do this in my sleep. Imagine how many times I've had to play it while making this tutorial for you. But this should be the last time. Cross your fingers for me. Yes. And that's it. So I hope this tutorial has given you an even better idea of the power of clones.